This quote is, I can't attribute it. It's been around for about 40 years, and it actually doesn't entirely apply to me because my mother does know what I do. I don't know how proud she is of what I do. I think she's proud of where I've got to in it. I started my career in London, and every year the main media, the Daily Telegraph, did a survey amongst consumers about the top 20 most trusted professions in the country. And every year, as I was a sort of 20, 21-year-old going up the ranks, there was my profession, advertising, which was always at number 19. And the only thing that we beat was used car salesmen. And those days, certainly in the West, haven't changed. Slightly more so in the East, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But it was this man, Vance Packard, who wrote a seminal book in the 1960s called The Hidden Persuaders, where he talked about the dark arts of advertising, how we used subliminal messages to get you to buy things you didn't want to buy. And if you know your sort of Christian mythology and your Christian symbolism, there is the apple from the Garden of Eden on a tempting hook, a barbed hook, which we're trying to offer. In other words, the woes and the evils and the ills of the world are down to me and my profession. We are the Pandora's box. We opened it up, all down to me. And you all thought it was bankers, didn't right? No, it's me. It's advertising. So that's what I want to talk to you about, because needless to say, I don't believe it. I didn't believe it then. I certainly don't believe it now. But the world has changed, and it's changing very, very fast, and it is changing for the good in this respect. And the reason for this is because of us. Well, in fact, not us, more you, as in the Asians in the audience, because the Asians are leading this fundamental change. And what I'm talking about, this change, is marketing as a force for good. And when I talk about this, I'm not going to be talking about corporate social responsibility programs. They do play an enormous part, and we know, all things being equal, that those companies and brands on a CSR platform will do better, will outperform those that don't. And we also know that consumers will pay willingly more for a service or product which is on an environmental or a social base which they believe in. That's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about how brands and companies have fundamentally changed how they act, and they act within transparency, with integrity to the consumers. Now, this is not a Damascene moment where they woke up one night and sort of said, we have to change the way we do things. As I said, it's been changed by us. And specifically, it has been changed. I would now pull out a mobile phone and show you a mobile phone, because that is what's changing the world. It is digital communication, and it is being led by Asia Pacific. Specifically, it is being led by this, that of Asia's 4 billion people, 1.1 of them are on social media. Now, to put it another way, that is over half the world's social media population. On average, an Asian consumer spends 5 hours on the internet. 2 of those are on social media, and a third is shopping on the internet. And these two, obviously, from a marketeer's perspective, are very much connected, because increasingly consumers use social media to shop, not just on the platforms such as what Tencent, Alibaba, WeChat are doing, but they genuinely will go out and ask their friends, what do you think of this before they buy the product? So we have a tremendous number of Asian consumers, obviously, who are now connected on that mobile device and who are using it for social media. But that doesn't actually give you an indication of the meaning of this device, because the meaning of this device is something else entirely. And it's very different from the East to the West. The West, by and large, went from fixed line to desktop PC, laptop PC, and then to the tablets and the mobiles. The East skipped. They skipped telephones pretty much altogether. To a large extent, they skipped desktop PCs, and they went straight to the mobile device. And that has forged a different type of relationship in the East and the West to these devices. The West is slightly colder. The East, it has become a fundamental piece of their being. We have done research, and we know that we've been told that consumers would rather give up their sense of smell than their mobile phone. And we read, this is serious, we read in the papers, we all see in the papers of especially in China or India, where fathers or sons are selling their kidneys to get a mobile phone. Now, this is extraordinary. For everyone in this room, it's extraordinary. It's certainly extraordinary for the Western consumers. It can only really be understood in the context of the role this plays in their lives. And as I said, it is fundamental because it is the glue that connects these consumers to their friends, to their society, and to their social media. Personal connectivity requires technology. 87%, 81% believe this to be true. In other words, I cannot be connected unless I have this device. Very different in the US and the UK. Furthermore, deep connections don't even require me ever meeting the person anymore. I can have a deep relationship purely through the technology device. So, if this is what they're doing, and this is how they're feeling about the brands, if social discourse is now pervasive, and it is used for shopping and for marketing across all these brands, I want to briefly take you to now how these consumers are looking at brands in Asia. Again, it is very different in the West. The West are rather more cynical towards marketers and advertisers. In the East, that is not the case. In the East, the consumers believe that brands have a positive role and must play a positive role and a force for good in the world. Their role is to make it a better place. And if they do, they will tell others about it. And of course, the reverse also works. If they don't, and they do a bad job, everyone will know about it. So this, and the combination of these two very significant forces, essentially means brands must be playing a positive role in the world, and if they do, people will tell others about it, and they will buy because of it. 1 billion consumers cannot be wrong, Asian consumers. So from a marketing perspective, what does that mean? Essentially, actually it means nothing. It is in no change to what marketers and advertisers have always been trying to do. We're trying to essentially do one thing, which is build trust. So my company, some 4 months ago, did a global piece of research. 120 countries, 30,000 consumers went out and trying to understand, okay, what is it that builds trust in brands? What is it that makes you feel trustworthy? And let's look at some examples of what do you see as the most trustworthy brands and the least, and why, and what's driving it. And I'm going to take you very briefly through a couple of these. It's a very in-depth study, and there's a lot to it, but just a couple. But what is most interesting out of this? It is not about us. It is not about marketing and advertising agencies. What has changed is that the organizations themselves have had to take on an ethos from inside out to change how they behave, how they are organized, and then let that be seen through the marketing and advertising. So if the phrase, putting lipstick on a pig was ever true, it certainly isn't true in the world today. Or the notion of greenwashing, of co-opting and jumping on a sort of environmental bandwagon. Today, in the court of sort of very public opinion driven by social media, that is no longer possible. So there is a couple of pillars that come through very clearly, and I want to run through them very briefly in terms of, from an organizational and a company perspective, what is now happening to these major brands. The first one is about credibility. To begin any journey of trust, the first basic step you have to be is trustworthy, right? A gentleman's word is his bond, so to speak. So from a company perspective, how this used to work is you'd have a whole bunch of auditors who would come into the organization, check your processes, and make sure that the internal organization is following the policies that have been laid down and dictated. Now, these days, it's too expensive, takes too long, and most importantly, it's not consumer-centric. It is internally focused. But that has all changed, of course, because today's auditors of every single brand is social reviews, and social media. The likes of TripAdvisor, the likes of Yelp are giving real-time, always-on information and feedback on those brands. And of course, those brands who take those reviews and put them on the sites without clearing out negative comments receive significantly higher sales than those who don't. So seeing negative comments on a blog, on a brand, gives you higher returns than if you just have positive. Next one, authenticity. News is real time. We live in the world and the eye of a social media, and anyone can find a truth about a company or brand. It may be their truth, it may be not the truth you want, but it's all there. From a company perspective, what is changing here is it means that the internal organizational strategy and culture has to match exactly the brand's philosophy on the outside, and then infuse it at every level of the organization to ensure there is an exact match between what the company believes in and is doing and is being said on the outside. A couple of examples. 4 years ago, KFC ran a promotion in the US for breast cancer awareness, pink ribbon. 50 cents for a bucket of 12 drumsticks was given to this charity. The derision was enormous, and you can imagine why, on a number of fronts, why this may be so. Take this against Chipotle, which is the darling of the stock market right now. Food with Integrity, the first company to denounce the use of GMOs in its food, the first company to talk about how it's naturally sourced and produced produce, where it comes from, the farms it comes from, and anything you need to know about the company or the ethics is up on its website. Coming to a market near you. Transparency. Now, as with any relationship, honesty is at the core. And as humans, we value much more a straight, honest, and often hurtful conversation than misdirection and obfuscation. So giving it straight. And this is often difficult because these large companies have legal departments within them who generally believe silence should be golden. So in other words, there's a crisis, shut down, keep your head down. There's two examples. Malaysian Airlines and AirAsia. They both had tragedies last year. We both know about them. Flight 8501 for AirAsia, MH370. MH370 is a case study now in terms of what not to do in crisis management. Flight 8501, Tony Fernandez, within 3 hours of that plane going missing, the first news out was on Tony's own personal tweet. There was a time for 3 hours where CNN, BBC, Channel News Asia, the most reliable source of information was from Tony Fernandez himself. He was on the scene within 4 hours, and essentially his business in the last 12 months has continued to surge. Malaysian Airlines, year on year to June, foreign inward arrivals has dropped 12% and is mainly driven by the Chinese who will no longer fly on that airline. And finally, all this is going on in the world. It's not just about listening to it. It is about responding to it. Because reputation is one of the most valuable forms of actually capital in a company. And the higher the loyalty, it leads to higher loyalty. It leads to shareholders holding on in times of crisis. But it is hard to build, and it's very quickly to lose, especially when you've got these waves of social media going on. But it's not just about listening. It is about responding. And the best and the smartest companies in the world today are now using this as an opportunity to their advantage. I will finish on this example. This was a poster which ran in the underground of London last year. It had been scrawled out, make love. Love had been scrawled out and war had been put in its place. And someone had written, please stop driving our taxis. A Muslim journalist going home from work on a Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock saw this, took a picture and put it up on his blog. Started, needless to say, a pretty big conversation in London between the Muslim and the Sikh community. Within 2 hours, the Gap social media team had contacted him and found out where it was. Within 3 hours, they had asked Posterscope, the company who put these posters up, to go and replace it. The next morning, Gap had changed their Facebook and their Twitter page to have this visual on it, and alongside it, they posted a letter denouncing those sort of race-fueled slurs and their position on the community. The next day, a letter appeared in the British media. It was an open letter from the Sikh community in London, praising Gap for their responsiveness, for their stand, and what a wonderful company it was, because the awareness that they had built would be much more than they could have done themselves. So turning it wonderfully. So some examples, but there is a common theme here. Success is no longer smart marketing. It is an organizational ethos that is being taken by the world's largest companies. It's been driven by youth primarily. It's been driven by that mobile device, and it is all pervasive. And fundamentally, it means that as these companies turn, and there is a responsibility, there is an honesty, and there is an integrity in everything they do, I, for one, can sleep better at night, and I think we can put Vance to bed. With that, thank you very much.